The Sands Hotel Showroom, Las Vegas. November 21, 1967. Dean Martin was halfway through Everybody Loves Somebody, the audience of 800 singing along, drinks raised, the kind of magic that made Vegas Vegas. It should have been another perfect Tuesday night, another standing ovation, another paycheck in a career built on making it look easy. But in 90 seconds, a stage manager would walk through that curtain and whisper something in Dane's ear that would shatter him in a way he would never fully repair. And the cameras were rolling. Before we see what happened that night, you need to understand who Dean was about to lose. Dean's sister Claudia was 3 years older than him, 1921, Steubenville, Ohio. Dean was 10 years old, getting beaten up behind the schoolyard by older boys who made fun of his accent, his Italian name, his father's barbershop. Claudia found him there, crying and bleeding, and she didn't comfort him. She grabbed his hand, marched him back to those boys, and stood between them. She was 13, barely taller than Dean, but she looked at those boys and said, "You touch my brother again, you deal with me." They never touched him again. She'd been the one who believed in him when nobody else did. When Dean wanted to quit singing in 1946, barely making rent in New York, playing clubs that didn't pay, Claudia had sent him her grocery money with a note that read, "Don't you dare give up. You're going to be somebody." Without her, Dean might have gone back to Steubenville, become a barber like his father, forgotten the dream entirely. The last time Dean spoke to her was 3 days ago. She'd called to tell him she was proud of him. He'd promised to visit after this engagement. What Dean didn't know, standing on that stage on November 21st, was that he would never keep that promise. The Sands showroom was Dean's temple. Intimate enough to feel personal. 800 seats arranged in a semicircle around the thrust stage, close enough that Dean could see individual faces in the front rows. The stage lights were hot, the kind that made sweat bead on your forehead after the first song, turning Dean's black tuxedo into a second skin that clung to his shoulders. The orchestra sat behind him. 17 musicians who knew Dean's catalog better than he did, who could follow his tempo changes without rehearsal. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. Mixing with the sharp scent of bourbon from the bar, the musk of stage makeup Dean wore under the lights. He held the microphone loosely in his right hand, the metal cool and familiar, his left hand gesturing casually as he sang. His bow tie was perfectly straight, his hair perfectly combed, everything about him relaxed and effortless. This was Dean Martin in his element. Comfortable, professional, in complete control. He was performing his thing between songs, that casual lean against the piano, the self-deprecating joke about forgetting lyrics, the sip from his prop drink that was actually apple juice, the audience eating it up, laughing at every beat, loving the illusion that Dean Martin was half drunk and completely spontaneous when really every moment was calibrated, professional, the result of decades making it look easy. This was what people paid for, not just the voice, the whole package. Dean Martin making the world feel lighter for an hour, making problems disappear, making everything seem manageable and fun. The women in the front row watched him with adoring eyes. The men wished they could be him. Everyone in that room felt like they were Dean's personal friend, like he was performing just for them. That's when Dean saw Carl Winters in his peripheral vision, the stage manager standing in the wings stage left, his face pale under the work lights, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something Dean had never seen before. Raw distress. Not supposed to be there, shows don't get interrupted. Not Dean's shows. Not ever. Not unless something is very, very wrong. Dean kept talking, finishing his joke about the drunk who walks into a bar with a steering wheel in his pants, delivering the punchline with perfect timing. Professional. Always professional. But his eyes flicked to Carl for just a second, and Carl's face told Dean everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. Something terrible had happened. Carl walked onto the stage. Not quickly. like there was an emergency. Not slowly, like he had all the time in the world. The walk of someone who knows they're about to destroy someone, and there's no way around it. The audience didn't notice at first. Then a few people in the front row saw, confusion crossing their faces. This wasn't part of the show. The orchestra kept playing their soft interlude music. Dean kept smiling at the audience, but his heart was already racing, his mind cycling through possibilities. His kids, his ex-wife, his aging father. Someone he loved was hurt. Or worse. But everyone in that room could feel it now. That shift in atmosphere, that sense that something was happening that wasn't supposed to happen. Dean's eyes locked on Carl. And in that look was a question. How bad? Carl's eyes answered. The worst. Carl reached Dean, leaned in close, his breath warm against Dean's ear. The microphone didn't pick it up. The audience couldn't hear. But the cameras caught Dean's face. And if you watch that footage now, and it still exists archived somewhere in a vault, you can see the exact second Dean Martin's world ended. Carl whispered 6 words. Claudia is gone. An hour ago, heart attack. I'm so sorry. Dean didn't collapse, didn't scream, didn't stop singing. But his hand, the one not holding the microphone, reached out and gripped Carl's shoulder. Not for support, for confirmation, for proof that what he'd just heard was real. His fingers dug into the fabric of Carl's jacket, knuckles white with pressure. His eyes closed. Just for a second. 1 second where the mask slipped. 1 second where 800 people and 3 cameras saw Dean Martin as human, breakable, broken. His jaw clenched. His breathing stopped. Then he opened his eyes and kept singing. Dean didn't signal the orchestra to stop, didn't address the audience, didn't walk off stage. He just continued. His voice slightly different now. The same notes, the same words. But something underneath had changed, like a guitar string tuned just slightly wrong. You couldn't quite identify it, but you could feel it. The warmth was gone. The charm was mechanical now. The smile was a mask over devastation. The front rows knew something was wrong. They'd seen the stage manager. Seen Dean's face change. Seen his hand grip that shoulder. Seen the color drain from his skin. But the back of the room, still laughing, still drinking, still having a good time, oblivious that they were watching a man perform while his heart was being ripped out of his chest. The disconnect was surreal. Half the audience witnessing tragedy, half celebrating entertainment. Dean reached the chorus. Everybody loves somebody sometime. And his voice cracked, just barely, just enough. He covered it with a smile. That famous Dean Martin smile, the one that had charmed millions. But it wasn't reaching his eyes anymore. His eyes looked hollow now, distant, focused on something far beyond the stage lights and the crowd. The musicians saw it. Conductor Frank Ortega saw Carl whisper, saw Dean's face change, saw the hand grip. He knew, and he played softer, giving Dean space, giving him somewhere to hide in the music. The trumpet player, a man named Eddie Shaw who'd worked with Dean for 12 years, later said he'd never seen anything like it. Dean's professionalism was legendary, but this was different. This was survival, because what else could they do? Stop the show. Force Dean to face what had just happened. They played on. Dean finished the song. The audience applauded. Stood, cheered. They loved it, loved him. Had no idea they'd just watched a man sing while dying inside. Dean smiled, waved, spoke into the microphone. Thank you very much. You're a beautiful audience. His voice steady, professional, completely destroyed. He could hear his own voice as if from a distance, as if someone else was speaking those words. Carl was waiting in the wings. Dean, we can cancel the rest. Dean's voice was flat, not angry, not sad, just empty. The people paid for a show. Carl tried again. Dean, nobody would. Dean cut him off. I said no, bah. He walked back toward the stage, toward the lights, toward 800 people who wanted to be entertained. Away from the reality that his sister was dead. Away from the phone call he'd have to make. Away from the funeral he'd have to attend. Away from the guilt that was already eating him alive. Dean performed for another 50 minutes. He sang, "That's Amore," a song about love and joy and Italian food and family. Dan smiled, danced, made it charming, twirled the microphone cord, winked at a woman in the third row, did the hand gestures everyone expected, made the audience laugh with his mispronounced Italian. Inside, he was screaming. Inside, he was back in Steubenville, 10 years old, holding Claudia's hand. Inside, he was hearing her voice telling him not to give up. Inside, he was dying. Between songs, Dean told his standard jokes, the drunk routine, the self-deprecating humor about his golf game, his marriages, his cooking. He did the bit where he pretended to forget the lyrics and lived something ridiculous. The casual, effortless Dean Martin persona. The audience laughed. Dean felt nothing. He was operating on autopilot now, muscle memory carrying him through material he'd performed 1,000 times. His face hurt from smiling. His chest hurt from breathing. Everything hurt. A woman in the third row asked for an autograph during a break. Dean signed her program, smiled, posed for a photo her husband took with a Polaroid camera. He put his arm around her shoulders. He leaned in close. He gave her the full Dean Martin experience. The woman would later frame that photo, put it on her mantle, show it to friends, tell the story of meeting Dean Martin in Las Vegas, never knowing she'd met Dean Martin in the worst moment of his life, never knowing that the signature on her program was written by a man whose hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. Dean started, "You're nobody till somebody loves you." Got 3 lines in, and stopped, just stopped. The orchestra stopped. The audience went quiet, confusion rippling through the room like a wave. Dean stood there, microphone in hand, silent. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow. Frank Ortega waited, baton raised, ready to restart whenever Dean gave the signal. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, wrong. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Then Dean said, simply, "Sorry, lost my place," from the top, and started again. No explanation, no acknowledgement, but everyone in that room felt it. Something was breaking. Something was wrong with Dean Martin, and nobody knew what or why or how to help. If you value real stories about the human cost of performance, like and subscribe. Here's what nobody understood. Dean wasn't performing despite the news. He was performing because of the news. Because on that stage, under those lights, he could be Dean Martin, the character, the persona, the charm. He didn't have to be Dino Crossetti, the man who'd just lost his sister, the man who'd never hear her voice again, never see her face, never keep the promise he'd made 3 days ago. The man whose sister had saved him, believed in him, sacrificed for him. The man who owed her everything and would never be able to repay it. On stage, he could pretend, and pretending was all he had left. The alternative was collapsing. The alternative was falling apart in front of 800 strangers. The alternative was becoming real. And Dean couldn't afford to be real. Not yet. Not here. Dean finished the last song, took his bow, waved to the standing ovation, the crowd on their feet, whistling and applauding, throwing napkins and roses toward the stage. Walked off stage. And the second he was out of sight of the audience, the second the curtain closed behind him, something in him gave way. Not physically. Dean didn't fall, didn't faint, but something collapsed internally. Joey Bishop caught him, hand on Dean's elbow, steadying him. "Dean, sit down. Let me." Dean's voice came out hollow. "She's dead." Not a question, a statement. Testing the words, seeing if saying them out loud made them real. She's dead, and I was singing "That's Amore." The absurdity of it, the cruelty, the impossible choice he'd made. They got Dean to his dressing room, Joey guiding him through the backstage corridors, past stagehands who looked away, who knew something was wrong but didn't know what. They closed the door, shut out the sounds of the departing audience, happy, satisfied, entertained, already forgetting the show, heading to the casino floor for gambling and drinking. Dean sat on the leather couch, still in his tuxedo, stage makeup still on. hair still perfectly combed, looking exactly like Dean Martin, feeling like nothing at all. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, the reality setting in. Joey didn't know what to say. What do you say? I'm sorry feels empty. She's in a better place feels cruel. You were amazing out there feels obscene. So Joey just sat next to him and waited. The dressing room smelled like old cigarette smoke and leather, the mirror surrounded by bright bulbs that made everything too clear, too real. Dean's bow tie was crooked now, the first imperfection all night. His collar was damp with sweat. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. Did I do the right thing? Dean's voice was barely a whisper, finishing the show. Was that? Should I have? He couldn't finish. Joey took a breath. I don't know, Dean, I honestly don't know. And somehow that honesty was better than any platitude. Better than false comfort. Better than pretending there was a right answer when there wasn't. Dean had to call his brother Guy. Had to tell him he knew. Had to explain that he'd found out on stage. That he'd kept performing. That he'd sung and danced and joked while Claudia was being pronounced dead in a hospital in Ohio. The phone call lasted less than 5 minutes. Dean's voice was mechanical, reciting facts. Flight information. Arrival time. Funeral arrangements. When Dean hung up, he said, Guy asked why I didn't stop the show. Pause. His voice broke. I don't have an answer. Dean didn't drink despite his drunk persona, despite the full bar cart in the corner of his dressing room stocked with every liquor imaginable. He sat in silence for 2 hours, staring at a photograph of Claudia on his dressing table. A picture from 1950 where she was laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, her eyes bright with joy. The same laugh Dean remembered from childhood. The same eyes that had looked at him with such fierce protection. Finally, he said, I need to go home. He left Vegas that night, drove himself to the airport in silence, took the first flight to Ohio in the morning, left without talking to press, fans, anyone, just disappeared into the night. During the flight, memories flooded back. Dean couldn't stop them, couldn't control them. They came in waves, each one more painful than the last. 1925 Steubenville. Dean was 14. Claudia was 17. Their father wanted Dean to quit school, work full-time in the barber shop, forget this singing nonsense. Dean was ready to agree, ready to give up, ready to accept that singing was a foolish dream for a barber's son. Claudia cornered him in the kitchen after dinner, her face fierce. She'd said, You quit singing, you kill something in yourself. And I won't watch you do that. You have a gift, Dino. You have something special. And if you waste it because Papa doesn't understand, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Dean had never forgotten. That conversation had changed everything. 1946. New York City. Dean was starting out, barely making rent, playing clubs where the owner might or might not pay, wondering if he should quit. Go back to Steubenville. Admit defeat. Tell everyone they'd been right, that he should have stayed in the barber shop. Claudia had sent him $60, her grocery money for the month, with a note. This is for you to keep going. Don't you dare come home until you've made it. Told him in a follow-up letter, You're going to be somebody, Dino. I know it. I've always known it. The world just hasn't figured it out yet. Without her, Den might have given up, gone back, become a barber like his father. She'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. She'd kept him going when every rational voice told him to quit. 3 days ago, Claudia had called. The conversation Dean kept replaying now, every word suddenly weighted with meaning he hadn't heard then. How are you, Dino? Claudia had asked, her voice warm and familiar. Dean had said, Buzzy, you know how it is. Vegas. Shows every night. Press during the day. Claudia had paused. Too busy to visit. There was something in her voice. Something Dean should have heard. Dean had laughed. Soon, I promise. After this engagement wraps up, maybe Thanksgiving, we'll do a big family thing. Claudia had said quietly, You always say that. Dean had felt a flash of guilt. I mean it this time. I really do. Another pause, longer this time. I love you, you know. Dean had been surprised by the sudden seriousness, by the weight in her voice. I know. Love you too, Claudia. Then Claudia had said, Dean. Her voice different, urgent in a way he hadn't recognized. Yeah. Dean had been distracted, looking at his schedule, half listening, thinking about the show that night. Proud of you. I need you to know that. Whatever happens, whatever you do, I'm proud of you. Dean had laughed, uncomfortable with the emotion. What brought that on? You getting sentimental on me? Claudia had been quiet for a moment. Just needed to say it. That's all. He'd thought it was strange, that sudden seriousness. Now he understood. She'd been saying goodbye. And he'd been too busy, too distracted, too wrapped up in being Dean Martin to hear it. She'd known something was wrong. She'd felt it. And she'd called to tell him she loved him. To tell him she was proud. To give him one last gift. And he'd brushed it off, made a joke, promised to visit later, that would never come. Claudia's funeral was in Steubenville at St. Anthony's Church, the same church where their mother's funeral had been held decades before. Dean flew in from Vegas, still exhausted from performing, still in shock from that night. The church was full. Family. Friends. People from the old neighborhood who remembered Dean when he was just Dino Crosetti, the barber's kid with the big voice and the impossible dreams. Everyone wanted to talk to Dean, to touch him, to tell him their memories of Claudia. We're so sorry, Dean. She was so proud of you. She talked about you all the time. At least she got to see your success. Dean nodded. Thanked them. Smiled appropriately. Shook hands, accepted condolences. Didn't tell them he'd been singing That's Amore while she was dying. Didn't tell them about the choice he'd made. Didn't tell them about the guilt that was consuming him from the inside out. At the viewing, Dean stood by the casket for a long time. Claudia looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. Her hair was styled the way she'd always worn it, pulled back in a simple bun. Her hands were folded across her stomach. She was wearing a blue dress, her favorite color. All he could think was, I should have stopped the show. I should have left the stage. I should have been there. His brother Guy approached, put a hand on Don's shoulder. She would have wanted you to finish the show. You know that, right? She was always so proud when you performed. She used to tell everyone. She'd watch you on TV and call everyone she knew to make sure they were watching too. Dean wanted to believe that. Needed to believe that. Couldn't quite manage it. They asked Dean to speak, to say a few words about his sister. He'd started to write something on the plane, an airplane napkin covered in crossed-out lines. None of them right, all of them inadequate. How do you summarize a lifetime? How do you explain what someone meant to you? How do you tell a room full of people that the person in that casket was the reason you became who you are? But when the moment came, when Father Murphy called his name, Dan stood. Walked to the podium, looked at the packed church, every pew filled with people staring at him expectantly, waiting for Dean Martin to deliver something beautiful and profound. And couldn't speak. Literally couldn't speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20, 30 seconds of complete silence. People shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Then Dean said, simply, I loved her. And I should have told her more often. His voice broke on the last word, and sat back down. That was all he could manage. At the grave site, as they lowered the casket into the November ground, cold air biting at exposed skin, gray clouds overhead threatening rain, the smell of fresh turned earth filling the air, someone asked Dean if he wanted to sing. One of Claudia's favorite songs. A hymn, maybe. Ave Maria. Something beautiful, something to honor her. Dean looked at them like they were insane. I'll never sing again. The words came out harsh, angry, raw. He didn't mean it. But in that moment, standing there watching his sister disappear into the earth, he believed it. How could he ever stand on a stage again, knowing what it had cost him? How could he ever perform knowing that he'd chosen entertainment over family? How could he ever face an audience without remembering November 21st? 2 weeks later, Dean had to go back to work. Contracts, obligations. The Dean Martin show was taping, people depending on him, crew members who needed their paychecks, sponsors who'd paid for airtime, an audience that expected to be entertained. His first performance back was the NBC studio in Burbank. He walked onto that stage the first time since that night in Vegas and stood under those lights. The familiar heat, the familiar weight of the microphone, the familiar faces of the crew. The audience applauded, welcoming him back, warm and enthusiastic, some of them calling out, "We love you." Done. Dean opened his mouth to sing and had a panic attack, not dramatic. No hyperventilating or collapsing. Just couldn't do it. Couldn't make the sound come out. His throat closed. His chest tightened. His vision narrowed, because every time he tried to perform, he was back on that stage in Vegas, hearing Carl whisper, feeling his sister die while he sang. The director called a 15-minute break. Dean walked off stage shaking. Dean learned to compartmentalize. Before every show, he'd do this thing, stand in the wings, close his eyes, take 3 deep breaths, tell himself, this isn't that night. This is a different stage, a different song, a different Dean. Claudia's gone. That won't change, but the work continues, the show continues. And then he'd walk out and perform. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes he'd get through an entire show without thinking about her, lost in the music and the performance and the character of Dean Martin. Sometimes he'd be mid-song and suddenly he was back in November 1967. The lights would feel wrong. The audience would feel distant. His voice would sound hollow. Those nights, his voice would crack. His smile would falter. His eyes would go distant. The audience never quite knew why, but Dean knew. Dean always knew. Everybody loves somebody. The song Dean was singing when Carl walked out, that specific song, Dean never performed again, not on TV, not in Vegas, not in concert, not in recordings, not even at home alone for himself. That song died with Claudia, died on November 21st, 1967. When asked why in interviews, Dean would say, "Just don't like that one anymore. Tired of it. Sang it too many times." But everyone close to him knew the truth. That song was November 21st, 1967. And Dean couldn't go back there. Not ever again. The song had become a monument to his choice, a reminder of what he'd done, a wound that would never heal. Years later, in 1983, Dean was asked in an interview on a late-night talk show about his biggest regret. The interviewer expected something safe, something carefully crafted for public consumption. "I wish I'd spent more time with my kids. I wish I'd done more dramatic roles. I wish I'd recorded more albums," Dean said, November 21st, 1967. The interviewer didn't understand the reference, looked confused, shuffled his note cards. What happened then? Dean looked at the camera, through the camera, at something far away. His eyes went distant. "I kept singing," and wouldn't elaborate. The interviewer tried to follow up. "Can you explain what you mean by that?" Dean just shook his head. The interview moved on awkwardly, the interviewer confused, Dean silent. The audience sensing they'd witnessed something profound, but not understanding what. That footage from November 21st still exists. Somewhere in a vault, probably NBC archives. Maybe a private collector. Dean tried to have it destroyed, offered money, a lot of money, made requests through lawyers, demanded it be erased, called in favors from executives. But you can't destroy everything. Copies exist. Backups. Somewhere, that footage survives. And sometimes, late at night, when Dean couldn't sleep, when the guilt was particularly bad, he'd think about that tape. About some future person watching it, seeing the exact moment his world ended, seeing him smile and wave, like nothing was wrong, like his heart wasn't breaking. And he'd wonder what they'd think of him. Would they see a professional who honored his commitments? Would they see a man who valued his audience? Or would they see a monster who valued entertainment over family? Dean's daughter Gail said years later in an interview, "My father was never the same after Aunt Claudia's death. Not in an obvious way. He still performed, still charmed audiences, still seemed like Dan Martin on the surface. But something in him had gone dark, like a light switched off that could never be turned back on. He'd be in the middle of a family dinner, laughing at a joke someone told, and you'd see it, that flicker across his face. That moment where he wasn't really there anymore. He was back on that stage, hearing the news, making the choice, and wondering every single day for the rest of his life if he'd chosen wrong. According to people close to Dean, friends who knew him for decades, he had the same dream for years, almost every night in the beginning, then less frequently as time passed, but it never fully stopped. He's on stage at the Sands, mid-performance, the audience singing along. Carl walks out from the wings, but this time, Dean stops singing, stops mid-ward, walks off stage without explanation, rushes to the airport, gets on a plane, flights there in time, walks into that hospital room, takes Claudia's hand, tells her everything, says everything he needed to say, thanks her for believing in him, thanks her for saving him, tells her she was the best sister anyone could ask for, tells her he loves her, watches her smile, watches her understand that he chose her, that she mattered more than any audience, more than any show, more than Dean Martin. And then he wakes up, alone in his bed, and remembers. It didn't happen that way. He kept singing, and she died. Every single time. The dream was both comfort and torture, a glimpse of what could have been, a reminder of what wasn't. If you found this story of unimaginable grief and impossible choices moving, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We share real Hollywood stories that explore the human cost of fame. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter. November 21st, 1967. The Sands Hotel Showroom, Las Vegas. The night Dean Martin found out his sister was dead and kept singing. People ask, should he have stopped the show? The answer is, there was no right choice. Stop the show, disappoint 800 people who'd paid good money to see him, but be human, be a brother. Honor the woman who'd made his career possible. Keep performing, honor his contract, give the audience what they'd paid for, but perform while his sister died alone in a hospital bed surrounded by strangers. Dean chose to keep singing and spent the rest of his life wondering if he'd chosen wrong, second-guessing himself, replaying that moment, asking himself over and over what Claudia would have wanted, and never finding an answer that brought peace. That night didn't end Dean's career. He performed for another 28 years after November 21st, 1967, did countless shows in Vegas, taped hundreds of episodes of his variety show, made movies, cut albums, entertained millions. But it ended something else, his ability to be fully present on stage without ghosts watching, his ability to enjoy performing without guilt shadowing every note, his ability to separate Dean Martin the entertainer from Dino Crosetti the man who'd lost his sister, who'd chosen work over family, who'd kept singing when he should have stopped. Every performance after that night carried the weight of November 21st. Every smile was work. Every song was haunted. Every standing ovation felt like applause for a man who'd kept singing when he should have stopped. The guilt never left. It just became part of who he was. Some losses heal. Time scabs them over, makes them bearable, makes them manageable, turns them into memories you can live with. This wasn't one of those losses. This was a wound that stayed open, that never fully closed. That bled every time Dean stepped on stage, because it wasn't just that Dean's sister died. People lose siblings. That's the natural order of things. It was that he found out while cameras were rolling, while 800 people were watching, while he was being Dean Martin instead of just Dean, while he was performing, entertaining, making people laugh. And he could never go back and do it differently, could never rewind time, could never make the other choice. He was trapped forever in that moment, that decision, that stage. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. Among his possessions, found by his children when they went through his house, was a photograph of Claudia, the same one from his dressing room at the Sands. Worn now, faded, the edges soft from being handled. A letter she'd written him in 1946, the one that said, "Don't you dare give up," folded and refolded so many times the creases had torn. And reportedly, according to one of his sons, a handwritten list of his deepest regrets, things he wished he'd done differently, things that haunted him. November 21st, 1967 was at the top, not the date written out. Just 3 words. I kept singing, but the footage from that night exists somewhere, in a vault, in an archive, on a tape that someone is preserving carefully. Din smiling, waving, performing, singing. Everybody loves somebody, while his sister died entertaining 800 people who had no idea his world had just ended, who had no idea they were watching a man's heart break in real time. The ultimate professional, the ultimate performer, the ultimate tragedy, the ultimate question. Was it the bravest thing he ever did? Honoring his commitment, giving the audience what they'd paid for, choosing professionalism over emotion? Or was it the thing that broke him forever? The choice that haunted him, the moment that defined him, the decision he could never forgive himself for? That's a story worth remembering.